All right, spooky season here again, and I always like to watch a few extra horror movies during the month of October. So I thought it would be good timing to share with you guys my top 10 horror movies of all time. I can't believe I haven't made a list like this for you guys before, and I had to do some thinking to come up with it. But first off, I don't recommend these movies to just anybody. Use IMDb and other things for research. I've made several videos to help us biblically reflect on and navigate the horror genre, so that if we do choose to engage with it, we can do so in a God-honoring and even spiritually fruitful way. So don't take these, or really any of my reviews ever, as actual recommendations. But I'm just happy to share what I think of these things, and then you can do with that what you want. On that front, though, of discerning your way through the horror genre, several videos on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel I'd recommend really quick first, and I'll try to put these in the links below the video. Can Christians be evil in games? Which you might think is just about video games, but no, actually, the idea there is, hey, if we can actually play as evil characters in a game, if I can make a case for that successfully from Scripture, then I think all the more we ought to be able to passively watch evil being characterized in horror movies and things like that. So it's very relevant to this topic. Can Christians be evil in games? Then also blood, gore, and the Bible, horror, gore, and Philippians 4:8, and how horror can make Christians wise. So all of those videos you can check out on the channel. If you have concerns or objections regarding the horror genre, please watch all of those videos in their entirety, because they were made to biblically address those concerns. All right, so my horror movies that I really like are those that don't rely heavily on jump scares, that hold up on multiple viewings, that tend to be maybe on the more disturbing side than on the gotcha scary side, and they almost always have like an interesting creature concept involved in them. This list is in no particular order, apart from my two honorable mentions, which would be Event Horizon and Brightburn. Event Horizon probably is the most intensely frightening movie I've ever seen. And for that reason, I don't watch it very often. It's been years since the last time I watched it. In my life, since I saw it in the theater, I've probably seen it less than 5 times. I do have it in my collection, but it's just like, it's hard to recommend for a number of reasons. But even myself, even though it's probably the scariest movie to me on this list, it's so disturbing and so scary to me that I just don't go back to it very, very often. So it's a very peculiar place in my collection. And then also Brightburn. I really like this movie. It just barely didn't make this list. It's basically a Elseworlds almost kind of retelling of Superman's origin story, but without using the copyrighted material. But what if Superman was actually from an evil race of aliens? And just leave it from there, I guess. But like was raised on a farm by 2 farmers in Kansas and that kind of thing. It's like, oh man, if you haven't seen a trailer for this, highly recommend checking it out. And I do have a review for Brightburn, at least, on the Christian Geek Central channel. All right, now to my list. I'm not going to number these. There are 10 of them, and in no particular order. We're going to start with Hellraiser, the 2022 movie. I have watched some of the original movies, the first 3 at least, and they're not really for me, but this one in 2022 really was working for me. It's this blend of Lovecraft in the sense of like the unknown and the unknowable and the terrifying realities behind the veil of physical reality, that kind of thing. But instead of like the Lovecraftian tropes of like squid monsters and other stuff like that, it uses the medieval hell tropes, which are actually not biblical at all. These ideas of flames and chains and stuff like that. Yes, there's talk of fire in the Bible regarding hell, but I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot that went wrong in medieval art that has stuck with people's ideas of what hell actually is or will be. But anyway, it uses those artistic tropes, and the story, in addition to having like these creepy creatures and unknowably horrible beings, it also has these interesting themes of the consequences of foolish and selfish living, and the consequences of making pleasure-seeking the highest aim. So I think there's some interesting meat to Hellraiser 2022 if you can handle the really disturbing elements of human suffering and torture and stuff like that that are brought about by these otherworldly beings. Anyway, I've got a review on that on YouTube you can check out. Not available as a video review from me is my next one, which is Prometheus. And this kind of also stands in here representing the entire Alien franchise. It is my favorite of all of those movies. It's got invasive body horror by these unknown organisms, and unknown is key. I mean, after so many Alien movies, the alien does become a bit too on the familiar side, and so I liked that Prometheus brought in some new creature concepts that we didn't know anything about, and that made them all the more frightening to me. I think there's also some interesting conversation starters about the nature of humanity's origins, and specifically the space seed theory, as it's been called at times, that some naturalistic biologists will sometimes suggest to avoid an intelligent design view of life's origins, because there's just not really enough time biologically for things to have developed in the time that, that we would say humanity has been on the planet. And so what they'll propose is, well, then it somehow arrived on a meteor from another planet or something like that, and then seeded the world with biological life, or the seeds, the beginnings of biological life from there. So that theory is a major part of the premise of Prometheus. So interesting stuff to potentially think about or dialogue about after watching that movie, but absolutely one of my favorites. Then we've got Color Out of Space, starring Nicolas Cage, which, casting Nicolas Cage can either really not work for me, or in some cases like, oh my gosh, this is perfect casting. He's just kind of a unique performer that way. And this movie, he was like dead on for me and for what I wanted. This has the Lovecraftian horror. It's an adaptation of a Lovecraft story, but it's got those elements of like encroaching madness slowly creeping upon people. It's got body horror. It's got a gore monster, and it's all centered on family relationships and family drama that really serves as this wonderful heart that makes it worth repeated viewings. There are extremely unsettling depictions of human decay because of the inclusion of suffering as it happens and how that is portrayed in the performances. It really took me to the edge of my tolerance, where the first time I viewed it, I was like, I don't know if this is good for me. I'm really feeling like something here. But that same intensity and that same questioning and reflecting led me to think and pray through some background fears that I wasn't fully addressing, and some background worries in my mind related to the potential loss of loved ones, or having to potentially see them suffer. The kind of what-if monster that lives in my head and a lot of people's heads that Lovecraft-style horror really kind of like connects with in some way. So the first viewing of Color Out of Space was very intense for me, and in some ways very unpleasant, but it was also ultimately very good for me. And since then, it still holds up to me as a worthwhile experience on multiple levels. I do have a review for Color Out of Space on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel that you can check out. Next up, also heavily Lovecraftian, heavily inspired by Lovecraft, though not a direct adaptation, is The Void. Now, this one you can often find for free on streaming sites. It is a crowd-funded indie horror movie that values practical creature and gore effects and does them very well. A lot of indie horror movies that value practical gore and creatures and stuff, they don't do them well. I appreciate the heart, but they don't pull it off. The Void totally does. These are some of the best practical creature, gore, horror, monster effects that I've seen. There are numerous Lovecraftian elements. Again, there's that encroaching madness. There's a bizarre kind of cult. There's this sense of unknowable horror. There's invasive body horror. There's at least one gore monster, I think multiple. There's the idea of people being warped and transformed in dark, disturbing ways by this hidden knowledge they've discovered. And I think thematically, this experience is useful to contrast with the character of God. A lot of Lovecraft stories presuppose this idea not of God's existence, but of these malevolent, ancient, all-powerful beings that are totally evil, or at least completely indifferent to the value of humanity. And so they are just like something we do not want to have anything to do with. We don't want to be noticed by them, nothing like that, because what results is in eternally enduring horror forever, and I think there's maybe something psychologically there that maybe would be related to hell. I don't know. But what's interesting is, when we fear the unknown, we can, as believers in Jesus, reflect on the character of God in those moments, as contrasted with, in Lovecraftian horror, the malevolent evils that you don't want to think about, cannot be trusted. So there's interesting food for thought if we realize and make those connections. Again, I've got a review for The Void on YouTube, and a few years ago I released a one-man audio drama adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's From Beyond, which includes supplementary material where I explore fear from a biblical perspective. You can get that at spiritblade.com or by jumping on the $1 tier at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Next up is The Thing, which I would also place here the modern prequel that was made in the mid to late 2000s. I can't remember. The original movie, The Thing, well, and the prequel, it's the same monster. This is my favorite movie monster of all time. There's nothing else that even comes close. The effects of the original movie still look unsettling, and because they are practical, they look very importantly present in the scene, which sometimes CG just looks like glorified cartoons to me, and it just kind of takes me out of the moment. But I so appreciate the practical nature of this creature in the original. There's some stop motion stuff in rare instances, like, okay, not that great. And likewise, in the remake, there's a few instances of CG where I'm like, oh, I wish they didn't do that, But for the most part, both of these movies are really going with practical, in-scene, in-camera effects. There's also like the reactions and the sense of paranoia in the performances of the men in that original movie, and paranoia in their actions that they take that were written for them in the script, and all of that, it just makes that story age beautifully, even if some of the practical effects don't necessarily. The prequel also does this great, even with a few CG shots that I wish were practical. The gore monster, just as a concept and in its execution, I find is enthralling to look at, and I care about these characters. I relate to their paranoia. I relate to their fear and even their suffering as it's depicted in the prequel movie. Just like really, really strong, The Thing and its modern prequel. Then next up, we've got Weapons. Now, this is the most recent addition to my library and to a list like this. The first viewing feels or felt very unsettling to me for its seemingly random, creepy imagery. It remains unsettling on a second viewing for its real-world occult inspirations and depictions of human deterioration and decay that parallel mundane realities more common, like alcoholism, dementia, drug addiction, mental health issues, and more. And that's what a lot of Lovecraftian movies and other horror movies do well without us realizing it until we're kind of clued into like, oh, this is a thing that horror does. It takes these wild concepts that still connect with us and make us afraid because there's some more mundane parallel that we either are afraid of experiencing or maybe in some places have experienced to some degree. That's how horror really functions effectively. And so a lot of that is going on in ways that on my first viewing I didn't even realize. I didn't even connect the dots entirely. There's also this relatable human drama that's attached to the story that makes it hold up for me on multiple viewings, and the disturbing depictions of rabid psychosis and injury that I don't want to say more about necessarily, they still have me gripping my seat when I watch this one. And Weapons is another one that I do have a YouTube review for that you can check out. Next up is Jeepers Creepers. The first movie in this franchise, is the best example to me of progressive revelation of a movie monster. It's a very common formula to slowly, over the course of a movie, reveal the nature of a monster, show a little bit more, have some expert come in who can reveal a little bit more about the nature of the monster, that kind of thing, until the end there is both the greatest understanding we've had up to that point of what the creature is and the greatest visual unveiling of the creature. That's a very typical formula in monster movies, and Jeepers Creepers, I think, is the best example of it. It's got some body horror. It's got a great monster concept. It does have a touch of humor, just a teeny sprinkling of like classic Freddy humor, but it's very sparing. And the protagonists, to me, very much maintain this convincing depiction of real fear. So I'm not able to like join in even in those brief moments like I think a lot of people do with Freddy. I'm not able to join in and kind of laugh along with the monster. When he's making jokes and in rare instances being just a little bit silly, I find that actually unsettling instead of funny. That's what I want when a villain, a monster villain, is taken in that direction. And at the heart of this movie is the relationship between a brother and sister, both in their 20s. And I relate to that. I've got an older and a younger sister. And despite their bickering and the fighting between them in this movie, these siblings do deeply love each other. And I think a possible message, a takeaway from this movie is, hey, love your family even when you may not get along with them sometimes. Love them, because tomorrow is promised to no one. The first sequel to Jeepers Creepers is pretty good, Jeepers Creepers 2, but I would definitely say skip the others. All right, next up, Frailty. Oh, this is a unique animal on this list. A man comes home and tells his two young boys that in a vision, God told him his job now is to hunt and kill demons. But here's the catch. These demons will look in every way and act in every way like normal people just living their lives. And so the young siblings have to grapple with what their father has just told them. They have to grapple with their view of their father in light of this. And they have to grapple with the horrifying situations that follow. This is a challenging movie, I think. I think in some ways it asks us, can we accept the truth of something that makes us very, very uncomfortable? Or will our discomfort with it lead us to say, no, this can't be true? And this is a real world principle that I think we all need to wrestle with. Sometimes there are certain views and perspectives, even that all still fall within Christian thought, that we would say, I find that view distasteful, repugnant. I don't even want to consider the merits of its potential evidence or reasoning or backing or anything like that. We just recoil from it. But this movie, I think, is it can give us a bit of an exercise in like entering into considering the possibility that something might be true, even if it makes us very uncomfortable. There are some uncomfortable realities, some things that like the reality of hell itself. I don't think anybody likes thinking about the reality of hell. God does not like the necessity of hell. But there are certain hard truths that we have to be willing to accept if there's reasoning for them. What if the viewpoint we consider villainous might actually be true? I think that's a potential takeaway from this movie. You will likely end the movie feeling uncomfortable. And that seems to be, I think, by design. But it's definitely one that can leave you thinking afterward. And again, that's Frailty. All right, next up, just two more. Saw. The original Saw. I've seen almost all of the Saw movies now. The first one, to my mind, is the only one worth having in my collection. In this movie, selfish life choices make two men the target of a serial murderer who uses brutal mechanisms to force horrible choices onto his victims, resulting in the potential for their safety and freedom if they do what is required of them, but that almost always instead ends with terrible death. The first movie in the Saw franchise works for me because of Cary Elwes's character, and especially near the climax, his performance. His character has a wife and child that he has neglected, even been unfaithful to, but he realizes almost immediately in this situation he loves them, he desperately wants to be with them again. So the question is, how far will he go? What will he be willing to do and endure in order to be with them again? This movie builds to a climax of just feverish intensity for me, unlike almost anything I have ever seen. The sequels very quickly lost the power of this personal drive that made the first one so strong an experience for me. But the original movie is still an unsettling, intense, and dramatically strong experience. And then finally, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the 2010 movie. This is a reboot that, despite not getting its own sequels, is plenty story all on its own. I think it's complete all on its own. Does it leave it open-ended as many horror movies do for like more? Yes. But I think also many horror movies leave things open-ended as a dramatic choice not to set up sequels. And I think that's easily how we can interpret this ending as well. This movie, I thought that maybe it didn't get sequels because it failed, didn't do well, but I checked on IMDb. Apparently it did well and was very profitable. The studio just changed directions away from the horror genre, or for rebooting or reviving horror products into, they just took a different direction, but they still owned the IP, and so it was just kind of trapped for a while and didn't go anywhere, which is a real shame to me after really appreciating this movie. In this story, a group of teenagers begin suffering nightmares that start to prove gruesomely lethal to their real bodies. And clues gradually point them back to a man they all knew or had connections with as very young children. And this man now, seemingly scarred by horrible burns, haunts and hunts them in their dreams while wearing a glove that basically has like knives for fingers. Now, unlike the original franchise, this version of Freddy is not here to entertain the audience with morbidly humorous one-liners. This is not a movie aiming to make you laugh. And that's why this character finally works for me here. He is disturbingly evil the more you get to know him and his background. There's just some revelations near the end that it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's bad. It's a way that is reflective of real and some of the worst human atrocities, so be forewarned that you may find it disturbing on that level. And he's legitimately frightening to me. A potential moral in this story might be cautioning against taking justice into your own hands because of the long-term consequences, the long-term ways that can stay with you, haunt you, even cause harm to you and to others. But mostly, I find this to just be a tense thriller experience with some nice dramatic substance to it in a few places. And that does it for my top 10 favorite horror movies. I would love to know what you would put on a list like this. And do you notice any interesting or worthwhile themes in your favorite horror experiences? You can let me know in the comments. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.